You've probably seen those videos showing World War II heating tricks. The tin can heaters, the clay pot radiators, the hot brick warmers. Thousands of preppers are adding these to their emergency plans right now. But here's what nobody's telling you. Most people are making critical mistakes that could turn these survival methods into genuine hazards. I spent months researching actual field manuals, veteran accounts, and historical military documentation, and what I discovered will completely change how you think about emergency heating. The soldiers who used these methods successfully knew three crucial things that modern tutorials leave out entirely, and that third one could save your life. When you see modern demonstrations of World War II tin can heaters, they make it look simple. Pack a can with sand, add some fuel, light it up. But here's what gets glossed over. Soldiers on the front lines were using these devices in partially open structures, bombed-out buildings with missing walls, or tents with deliberate ventilation gaps. They understood something critical about combustion that many preppers today completely miss. Every fuel source produces different byproducts when it burns, and in an enclosed space, those byproducts accumulate fast. The kerosene and alcohol that soldiers used were chosen not just for availability, but because they burned cleaner than alternatives. When troops improvised with cooking grease or other petroleum products, they always maintained airflow, even in freezing conditions, because they'd seen what carbon monoxide poisoning looked like. Modern preppers often test these heaters indoors, with windows sealed tight, thinking they're simulating a genuine emergency scenario. What they're actually simulating is a recipe for disaster. The soldiers knew that staying warm meant nothing if you didn't wake up, so ventilation wasn't optional. It was the first rule. If you're planning to use any improvised combustion heater indoors during an actual emergency, you need to understand the specific fuel you're burning, its byproducts, and exactly how much fresh air exchange your space requires to stay safe. Here's something that fundamentally changes how these heating methods actually worked. World War II soldiers weren't sitting still in a temperature-controlled environment before trying to stay warm with improvised heaters. They were burning thousands of calories daily through intense physical activity, marching, digging, carrying heavy equipment. Their bodies were already generating significant heat that these methods merely helped retain and supplement. Modern preppers testing hot brick bed warmers or layered clothing systems are usually doing so from a baseline of sedentary modern life with regular meals. The physiological reality is completely different. A soldier who'd been moving all day and consuming high-calorie rations had a metabolic furnace already running hot. Those heated bricks and air-gapped clothing layers worked in concert with an elevated basal metabolic rate. For someone in a genuine emergency scenario, especially one involving food scarcity or reduced physical activity, these same methods will feel far less effective. The historical record shows that when soldiers were pinned down for extended periods without adequate food, even the most ingenious heating tricks barely kept hypothermia at bay. This means that if you're seriously preparing for emergency heating scenarios, you can't separate the heating method from your overall survival strategy. Your food storage, your activity plans, and your heating approach all have to work together. Those soldiers weren't just keeping warm through clever tricks, they were maintaining core temperature through a complete system of nutrition, movement, and strategic heat conservation. The third critical mistake involves something soldiers learned through hard experience, but modern demonstrations rarely mention: material degradation under sustained use. That tin can heater you see in a 5-minute video demonstration? Soldiers sometimes ran those for hours or even days in extremely cold conditions, and they knew which cans could handle it and which would fail catastrophically. Cans that previously held certain chemicals or foods could release toxic fumes when heated. Soldered seams could melt and leak fuel. Thin metal could warp and tip over. The troops developed an intuitive knowledge of metallurgy born from necessity. They tested materials in safer conditions before relying on them in critical moments, and they constantly monitored their improvised heaters for signs of structural failure. Modern preppers often grab whatever metal container is handy and assume it'll work because it's metal. The same principle applies to the clay pot radiator setup. Those terracotta pots everyone uses now, they're not all created equal. Some contain moisture that can cause cracking under heat. Some have glazes that weren't meant for direct flame exposure and can release harmful vapors. World War II soldiers using inverted helmets or scavenged ceramic containers chose pieces that had already proven themselves under battlefield conditions. They were constantly evaluating and replacing equipment, not setting something up once and assuming it would work indefinitely. For genuine emergency preparedness, you need to test your materials repeatedly under controlled conditions, understand their failure points, and have backup options ready. The difference between a helpful heating source and a dangerous liability often comes down to knowing when a piece of equipment has reached the end of its safe, usable life. So, what's the deeper lesson that modern preppers need to understand about World War II heating methods? These techniques were never meant to stand alone. They were part of an integrated survival system developed under the most extreme conditions imaginable. When soldiers used body heat sharing, they were also wearing properly layered clothing, consuming hot liquids throughout the day, maintaining physical activity to generate internal heat, blocking wind with earthworks and strategic positioning, and using multiple small heat sources rather than depending on a single method. The genius wasn't in any individual trick, it was in how they combined these approaches into a comprehensive strategy. Each method compensated for the weaknesses of the others. The hot brick warmed the sleeping area, while proper clothing retained that warmth. The tin can heater provided a cooking source for hot soup that raised core temperature from within. Windbreaks and insulation reduced overall heat loss so that smaller heat sources could be effective. Modern emergency preparedness often focuses on collecting techniques like items on a checklist, but what actually kept soldiers alive through brutal winters was understanding how these methods worked together as a system. If you're serious about emergency heating, don't just learn individual tricks, study how they interconnect. Practice combining methods. Understand which approach works best in which scenario, and how to transition between them as conditions change. World War II soldiers survived winter conditions that would kill most people today, not because they had better equipment, but because they had better understanding. They knew the principles behind their methods, the dangers inherent in each approach, and how to adapt when circumstances changed. That knowledge, not the tricks themselves, is what modern preppers really need to learn. If this video changed how you think about emergency heating and historical survival methods, subscribe for more content that digs deeper than surface-level techniques. Share this with anyone in your preparedness community who needs to hear the real story behind these World War II heating methods, because understanding the truth could genuinely make the difference when it matters most.